Welcome back to Podcast Magazine. This is our podcast, and we're so glad you've joined us again today, especially now because we are celebrating the 1 year anniversary of Podcast Magazine. Woohoo! Yeah!
Woo-hoo.
And I have the man here himself, so we're going to do like Michael Jackson said, go behind the mask and behind the microphone and share a lot of juicy stuff with you. Like, okay, how was this magazine? How did it come about? And what all does it take? What's the process? And who's it for? And how'd you do that thing? So we got that all for you. So stay tuned. Let me tell you a little bit about him. His name is Steve Olsher. He's known as the world's foremost reinvention expert, the founder and editor-in-chief of This Here Magazine, Podcast Magazine, original chairman and founder of Liquor.com, and author of one of my favorite books, and that is, what is it? Your What? Yeah. And
Yeah.
I think, did I say the title right on that?
You did. What is your what? You did.
Yeah, and I love that book because it helped me to really feel like I was on the right track because I'm definitely a communicator.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely.
Yep.
And you're a promoter. Yeah.
True.
Yeah, because he is a master promoter is one of the things that I love about him. He's very genuine and very authentic. So you're going to really appreciate finding out who he really is. So, Steve, welcome to your magazine.
Thanks,
and you look good on the cover, may I say. Awesome.
Oh, many thank yous. Many thank yous. Yeah. No, thank you for doing this. I like hanging out here and chatting with you whenever I can. So it's good to chat again.
Well, it only took you 100 days. And all I can say is, wow, frontwards and wow, backwards. Because that's kind of like unheard of, 100 days to, come up with the concept and put your team together and, present the magazine, even in its first issue, looking good, looking fine, looking amazing. So Inquiring Minds wants to know, how'd you do that?
Yeah. So it's really been an interesting and fun trek over the last year. And what you're referring to is from the day that the idea hit me in terms of why isn't there a magazine or some sort of publication that is really catering to podcast fans in the same way that Sports Illustrated caters to sports fans, or Wired caters to people who love technology, or Vanity Fair goes beyond what you might normally see in a TMZ and that sort of thing in terms of celebrity, or even like Rolling Stone, right? And what Rolling Stone does for the music industry. Why isn't there a magazine or a publication that is really fan centric, fan focused, and gives fans the opportunity to go beyond the microphone and deeper into the lives of the podcasters that they love, and deeper into the stories that they can't get enough of, but also introduces podcast fans to shows that they haven't heard of and should be listening to. And I was literally at a conference, and some of you may know the gentleman whose conference I was at. His name is Brendan Burchard. Yeah. And I love giving credit where credit is due. And that's where I was, sitting there at Brendan Burchard's event called Influencer. And I had heard that Brendan was going to launch a magazine called Influencer Magazine. And he'd been talking about this for a while, at least a good year before I sat in the audience, October of 2019. And I saw one sign at the event, and one sign at the event had a picture of Influencer Magazine and coming soon and this, that, and the other. And so I was like, that's a really smart idea. He'll sit down with all these top influencers, and those influencers, of course, will share the fact that they're featured in this magazine with their big audiences, and he'll build up this huge database and get, so many people reading this magazine and this, that, and the other. And I thought that's just a really smart idea. Why, again, isn't there something, in the realm of podcasting that, again, caters to podcast fans? And I knew I wanted to cater to podcast fans, Raven, because there are good events and there are some industry journals and so on that cater to podcasters. But the reality is, when you're exploring different opportunities from a business perspective, one of the metrics that you have to look at is what's known as the total available and accessible market, right? In terms of what's the size of the potential audience. And at the time that I'd started thinking about doing this, there were roughly 60 to 70 million people over the age of 12 in the United States alone who listen to podcasts on a monthly basis. And there were about 700,000 podcasts, 800,000 podcasts. Again, when this idea hit me back in October of 2019. And so when you look at the difference in size, and then you know this as well as anybody, Raven, that even though there were 700,000 or 800,000 podcasts at that time, half of them were no longer producing shows.
Yeah.
And half of those only had 10 or more episodes. So when you come right down to it, there's only really about a pool of maybe 200,000 active podcasters in that particular, just in that particular pond, if you will, that you could fish in. So I saw the much bigger opportunity being the podcast fans, the podcast listeners. And so that's how it all started, was just thinking, God, there's got to be a magazine out there that does what we're doing, right? And so like anything else, right? What do you do when you're struck with an idea? You go to Google and you start looking it up. And is there a podcast magazine? Well, there was something a while ago, but it clearly had stopped. They weren't doing anything else with it. And then you start thinking, okay, well, if you're going to do this endeavor, what are you going to call it? And I was like, well, what else would you call it? I mean, you've got to call it podcast magazine, right? I mean, that's just the most obvious thing. And so I started looking for the domain, and the domain wasn't available. So I was like, oh man, maybe somebody is doing something with it. Looked for the domain. I saw that nobody was actually doing anything with it, tracked down the owner of the domain, and ended up putting in an offer for the domain. And it was one of those numbers where it was kind of like they wanted $2,500 for it. And so it was kind of just enough where it gave me pause. Like if it was $200, I'd be like, okay, no problem, right?
Yeah.
But 2,500, I'm like, I don't know.
Yeah.
I ended up negotiating it out to under that for $2,250 is what we picked up the domain for. And then I figured, we'll probably be all in for about 10 grand to launch our first issue and just really see how it is. And is it worth $10,000 as a gamble to see if this would fly and see if people would have an interest in it? And yeah, quickly I just started putting out this idea to folks and Facebook, social media, et cetera. And everybody's like, that seems like a great idea. How can I get involved? And then before I knew it, we had 20 something odd category directors, people who'd said, hey, if you want someone to handle this particular category, like business or arts or religion and spirituality, et cetera, I'd love to be responsible for that category. And it just really snowballed from there. Unfortunately, I've been working with the same graphic designer for about 12 years now.
It's amazing.
Wow. And I said to her, look, we're thinking about doing this. It'll probably be 40 to 50 pages or so. What would you charge us to design this as a digital magazine? And maybe we'll do some print, this, that, and the other. And lo and behold, by the time I turned around, our first issue ended up being 140 pages, and we launched it and released it within 100 days of just sitting there with that idea of why isn't there a magazine that caters to podcast fans?
Yeah, wow. And I think that was just brilliant in itself, wanting to cater to the fans. And so what comes up for me, and I'm sure a lot of the readers and the listeners, is how did you determine what the fans wanted? Did you guys do a survey? Did you talk to your event people? Can you share a little bit about that concept?
Yeah, there are certain things in business that I consider myself to be fairly well versed in and fairly smart about. And then there are other areas of business that I clearly still have a lot to learn, even at this ripe old age right now. But I got to tell you, it was just purely a gut hit. It was all instinct. I'm not going to sit here and say that we went out and we surveyed. I'm not going to sit here that and even pretend that we did all of this market research.
It was just gut.
We didn't do any of that. It was just simply a gut hit that this is a growing medium. This is an opportunity here that we haven't seen and don't get me wrong, obviously podcasting has been around for a long time. But the reality is that we finally got to the point where technology has caught up with demand. In terms of if you wanted to access a podcast back in the day, you'd have to work pretty hard through a podcatcher and download it and then move it to a different device to be able to listen to it and play it, right? So if you weren't fully committed to listening to a podcast, you probably weren't going to be a consumer. What ended up happening is, well, of course, with Apple taking this on and saying, let's try to do something here and take it out of the closet and put this more into the mainstream. And let's make it easier for people not only to access shows, but of course, through other channels and whatnot for creators to create shows. It just became this perfect storm of this is a fairly old medium that it was being rebirthed right in front of my eyes. And I didn't want to miss that boat of having seen what happened, with the internet and how the internet really blew up, and having been on the really embryonic early stages of the internet and seeing how that trend line was going. I felt like that trend line would continue here in the medium of audio, and specifically podcasts. And so I just really went with my gut, based on my experience of seeing how the industry was already beginning to shift.
Yeah. And there's something to be said about going with your gut, though, because I think all of us always say God gave us women a double dosage of that instinct, and what's going on in your gut. But because a lot of times, by you really going with your gut, you nail it. And in this, you did nail it. Do you think part of that was because you were a podcast fan or connoisseur yourself?
Yeah, I mean, look, I have always had a love for radio, and for me, radio was always the holy grail. And I felt like, growing up, I felt like if I could get a radio gig, that would be a dream job. Just always loved to talk, always loved to just hear my own voice, I guess. Right. So, but yeah, I've always had a love for radio. And back in 2009, I took the leap and actually bought radio time on a small AM station in Chicago. And what became really clear to me at that point was, number one, if someone is not listening at that exact moment in time to that exact channel, it goes unheard, right? So much of radio actually goes unheard or has very, very few listeners because of that, right? I mean, you have to be in the exact place at the exact time in order to be able to hear that broadcast. And it was around that time that I started looking into podcasts, and I said, you know what? Why don't I take the audio from this radio interview and radio hour that I'm creating here, and let me turn that into an MP3 file, and then put it up on a distribution site, et cetera, and let me also release this as a podcast episode. And so I released the first episode of Reinvention Radio as a podcast in 2009, and took some time off and just started fumbling around on some other things, and started releasing consistent episodes in 2015, and stayed consistent for the most part from that point forward. But yeah, for me, I just always felt like podcasting gives people the opportunity to ostensibly have their own radio station, where the beautiful thing about it is that the cost of entry is extremely low. As a matter of fact, it's almost zero.
Yeah.
And you can reach almost anyone, almost anywhere, at almost any time, simply by clicking a few buttons on your screen and hitting submit. And before you know it, you have your own radio station. And that, to me, was just, it hit me right away that there's something here that is scalable and sustainable.
Wow, that's amazing. And here you are. I mean, first of all, again, congratulations, 1 year. How does it feel, man?
It's interesting, and in full transparency, that $10,000 gamble actually has now turned into closer well, I'll just give you the number. I mean, it's well over 200 grand that we have invested into this right
Wow.
now. And
Mm-hmm.
that doesn't even include my time and the time of all of the category directors who are volunteers. I mean, you are a category director for us, Raven, which we
I
love
love
and
it.
appreciate for music.
Mm-hmm.
And look, from our perspective, we hope that we're fulfilling the promise of helping you to become an influencer in your own right, where
Absolutely.
you control that category. You have full control over what gets published in the music section of the magazine, the feature, the under the radar or overrated review, the off the charts selection, et cetera, et cetera. And so, our goal was always to help our category directors become influencers in their own right and gain more visibility and gain credibility and authority and so on around what they're doing.
Well, I
And
love that because that's one thing that you are always really good at is not just being a promoter, but allowing people to collaborate and kind of hook their wagons to you. And you're so genuine, I should say generous with that. And you're right, we do. I've seen people from your live events go off that never taught podcasting before that's teaching it now. So you do leverage people up. So with that said, is this what one of your concepts for a podcast magazine? Because you said you wanted to make it fan based. Was your intention also, since you're a podcast mentor, to have the ones that do have podcasts to be able to leverage up their shows, going behind the microphone and seeing what these other successful podcasters are doing?
Yeah, it's a great point, and part of the reason why we do sit down with leading podcasters, people who have top 100, top 10, top 5 type shows, the Dave Ramsey's and Adam Carollas and Jenna Kutchers and Kim Commandos of the
Katie
world.
Couric, one of my dream ones.
Katie Couric, yeah, exactly. Is because we all have something to learn and everyone has something to teach. And I do believe that those very successful shows and the people behind the shows and the people who sit behind the microphone of those shows bring a unique perspective to what it takes to create a successful show. Of course, our goal is always to humanize them and to share who they are as people, as opposed to just simply talking about their podcast. I mean, the goal of all of our features is to humanize the people behind the microphone and take our readers beyond the microphone with them, which is our tagline for the magazine. And in those conversations, of course, there's going to be tips and tools and strategies and shortcuts that the people who we feature share in terms of what has made their show so successful. And our hope is that a little bit of that breaks off into the world of our readers who also have podcasts, right? And not all of our readers, of course, have podcasts. Some of them do. Most of them don't. But from that perspective, we certainly do hope that we give those who are readers and are podcasters more tools to leverage to be able to build the following and the amount of profit that they're able to generate right from those shows.
Yeah. And another thing that Podcast Magazine offers for those readers that may not be aware of it is they have an opportunity to write in and share what they're getting from it or what they like, what they don't like. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, so there's a few different things that we have going on in the magazine, right? One of the things that we wanted to make sure that we did was really level the playing field for all podcasters to gain visibility through our platform, whether it's the digital edition or the print edition or our email list or the web traffic or our social followings, et cetera, by doing things like, number one, having our conversation corner where people can write in and share their thoughts on the magazine or what's going on in the industry that they want other people to know about. And the other thing that we do is we have our Hot 50 chart, which is the only monthly chart that is created by fans for fans and is based on voting and nothing more than just podcast fan voting. And so what a lot of our podcasters are doing, the people that are featured in the Hot 50 chart, and then we now started the Hot 50 Countdown podcast itself, where we have our own Casey Kasem style show, hosted by the one and only Rob Actis, that counts down the top 50 podcasts in the land as determined by the podcast fans. But what a lot of our podcasters do to gain visibility in the magazine is have their fans vote for them. And at the end of the tally period, we tally them all up, and each month we create a new chart. And so, yeah, it's exciting to be able to get podcasters more visibility on what they're doing. And again, our goal and our MO really here behind all of this is to level that playing field as much as possible, because as podcasters ourselves, the large majority of the people who are involved with the magazine have their own shows. We understand that discoverability is a challenge and getting more and more difficult by the day as deeper and deeper pockets come into the mix.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're going to move on to some other things I want to ask you, but I do have to also commend you on something new that I've been noticing. And that is you have, I think it's called the Podcast Daily Dose.
The Daily Dose, yeah.
For your subscribers. So if you haven't subscribed, you got to subscribe, because this has been a real refreshing treat, may I add.
Yeah. So one of our goals is to highlight people who are doing amazing work in the industry. And so the magazine comes out on a monthly basis. And what we had heard from some folks is, we love the magazine. It's great to get it on a monthly basis. But what else you got? Like we only hear from you once a month when the magazine drops, and we'd like to hear more from you. So we just started a daily newsletter, which we're calling the Daily Dose, which is Podcast Magazine's daily serving of a podcast you probably haven't heard of, but should be listening to. And so that's another one of our mechanisms for introducing podcast fans to shows that might be flying under the radar for them.
Awesome. Well, let's move on and share with the readers and the listeners, Steve, a little bit about you. Now, you have done so much. And one of the things that connected me with you is being mentored on, how, in my case, to better podcasting, because I've been doing it. So this is the great thing. It's not just for newbies, it's for people that want to advance and get better. And then there were so many other things that I learned about you that the readers may not even know. You have, I don't know what, a good 50 courses or something. I know I'm probably got about 10 of them myself.
Right. Yeah. So, I mean, certainly I do a lot of teaching. We have courses that are of course, related to podcasting, our Profiting from Podcasts training, our Launch Your Podcast training, our year-long Icon Maker program, where we literally take people by the hand to help them become icons of influence in their niche. But, one of the things that a lot of the readers may not know is that, I've been an entrepreneur for the better part of 30 years. I started out way back in the day as a DJ, and Chicago house music was my thing. And back in the late 80s, that's all I was spinning, and a lot of the clubs, and ended up building up a pretty decent following, and decided, you know what, maybe I can open up my own nightclub. And I was all of 19 years of age when I had that idea, and ended up putting a business plan together and finding a single investor who actually funded the whole thing. And by the time we opened, I was 20, but I actually opened up, that was my first real business endeavor of opening and running a nightclub, a non-alcoholic nightclub, at the age of 20. And it went really well for a while. And like all businesses run by people who are of that age and ilk, we hit our bumps in the road and ended up going on to other things. But since that time, just got involved in a number of different endeavors, catalogs, .coms, actually bought liquor.com and was the original founder of liquor.com. Then ended up losing that when the .com crash, claimed it back, and 2006, and then put together a different team, built it up, and that sale actually took place in late 2019. So we exited from liquor.com after all was said and done in 2019. Also developed about $50 million in real estate. Some of that, of course, did really well, and some of that didn't when we got caught up in that crash of all the real estate, that whole cycle there, and ended up giving several properties back to the bank and so on. But yeah, I am one of the few coaches in this world who has actually built businesses outside of the coaching world. And I think all of these experiences of being an entrepreneur and being a writer and being a speaker, putting a book on the New York Times list, and so on, it has really allowed me to do the work that I'm doing now, and even carries into the new work that we're moving forward here in terms of our family business of opening a funeral home here in San Diego, which will be the first new funeral home in San Diego in over 60 years. Yeah, thank you, for my wife and our family here. So that'll open in 2021.
Yeah. Wow. That's amazing. I've heard you mention that at your live events, which is another fabulous thing. I mean, New Media Summit, is the bomb. Okay. The best of the best, totally different concept, kind of a little bit of Shark Tank. And I don't know, it's good mixture. But you've done other events before the New Media Summit. You want to talk about doing live events, and especially around podcasting, because there again, you have not just said, okay, I'm going to do what I can in the podcasting world. You have really risen even beyond an influencer. You're more than that, because you say podcast, Steve Olsher's name is coming all the way around. And from live events, from courses to live events to your own podcast, and now to the magazine. Yeah.
And I appreciate you saying that. And I do think that is one of the key questions that every entrepreneur has to be able to answer at the various stages of their business's life cycle, which is, what conversation do I most want to be part of?
Yeah.
And ultimately, the question then circles back to, how do you put your name in the middle of those conversations, even if you're not in the room, right? And for us, when we determine that podcasting is the conversation that we most want to be part of, we had to figure out how to make that happen, because it wasn't going to happen based on the merits of our shows alone. I mean, again, Reinvention Radio, Beyond 8 Figures, shows that I've hosted now for a while. We actually ended up selling Beyond 8 Figures. But Reinvention Radio, as an example, we've been doing this, like I said, off and on since 2009, full-time almost, in terms of releasing episodes on a consistent basis since 2015. But look, based on the merits of the podcast itself, we weren't going to be in that conversation. We weren't seeing numbers like Rogan. We weren't seeing numbers like NPR. We weren't seeing those numbers at all. So we had to figure out, what can we do here so that we can ostensibly sit at the hub of the wheel, right? If you can think about a bicycle that has all of these spokes that connect to the center of the wheel, how can you position yourself at that center of the wheel, as the hub of the wheel, so the different spokes of whatever industry it is that you most want to be a part of that conversation connect to you and what you were doing? And for us, that answer, of course, became Podcast Magazine, because if you're a podcaster, you want to be featured in the magazine. If you have a product that caters to podcast fans, or appeals to that demographic, you want to be in the magazine. If you have related products, programs, and services, you want to be in the magazine, et cetera. So it's really helped us position ourselves as being at that epicenter, being the hub of the wheel. And this translated back to the work that I've been doing around live events for quite some time. The Reinvention Workshop is an event that I used to teach for years and years.
I bet that was help people. One, Steve. It was. Changed many lives, didn't it?
We did. Yeah, I did it monthly for years.
Wow.
And it was based on the teachings in my New York Times bestselling book, What is Your What? Discover the One Amazing Thing You Were Born to Do. And really helped people to discover their what, and then lay out a game plan for sharing and monetizing it. So I did that for years. Internet Profits Live, PROPHETS, was an event that I did for years.
Wow.
And that gave leading internet authorities the opportunity to share their brilliance on that stage. People like Vishen Lakhani and Brendan Burchard and Pat Flynn and you name it. They took that stage at some point over the years.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, then moving into the New Media Summit and now moving into Pod Expo, which is the new event that we'll be doing.
Can you talk about it? Can you share anything on that?
Sure.
Or? Okay.
Yeah, Pod Expo.
Exclusive here on Podcast Magazine. Take it away.
Right. Yeah, Pod Expo is going to be very much like Comic-Con is for that world in terms of giving podcast fans the opportunity to meet face to face with the podcasters that they admire and whose shows they listen to. And we'll do live episode recordings and we'll do meet and greets and pretty much everything that you see. The best comparison, again, is Comic-Con. Everything that you see that they do really, really well, we'll try to emulate as best as we can in this particular world for the medium of podcasting. So we'll see if we're going to end up doing it this year or not with everything that's going on. At the very least, we'll do it online, but we'll see. But yeah, that'll definitely take place this year.
Yeah, I want to go a little bit more deeper on finding out some personal stuff with you, if you don't mind, to share with the readers. Like, I believe you ride a motorcycle. You still do that?
Well, I did. As a matter of fact, I rode a motorcycle for a number of years back in college and in those early days. Stopped riding for a while, and then around 2000 and maybe around 11 or 12 or so, started riding again. And in hindsight, it was kind of crazy because in Chicago, in Illinois, they have no helmet laws. So you can actually ride without a helmet, which is how I chose to ride. And in hindsight, that was kind of scary and silly. But yeah, I rode for a while, and then as my wife got more involved in the funeral industry, and as friends of mine kept telling me stories of people that were in motorcycle accidents and so on, and just a combination of those stories, and then my wife seeing people show up on her table as a funeral director and embalmer of people who got in accidents and so on, just realized this is probably not the best idea anymore. So I did trade in the motorcycle for a Jeep, and I can now take the doors off the Jeep and the windows off the Jeep, and that's the next best thing, because I'm still getting the wind in the face, but not the asphalt on the face if the car takes a tumble.
Yeah. So is that a hobby? Taking that for a ride? Is that your hobby?
I like that. I will say my biggest hobby for the last 20 years or so has been Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I really enjoy Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and I've been training under. I started out many moons ago in 2000, training under Carlson Gracie Sr. and then his son Carlson Gracie Jr. And I've been at a few different schools now that we moved to San Diego from Chicago in 2014. And so still involved with it here. One of these days, I'll turn that brown belt into a black belt. It'll happen as soon as I can get back on the mats. But for now, yeah, it's still a love, still a passion, and I guess I'm still a glutton for punishment, because I'm not getting any faster. I'm certainly not getting any stronger. I'm not getting any better, and it is to a large extent a young man's game, and woman's game for that matter. Yeah.
Speaking of young man, I know I've seen pictures of you and your son. You have two sons?
Yeah. So my wife had a son when she was much younger. So I've got a stepson who still lives in Chicago, and we
call those bonus sons.
Exactly.
You're a bonus dad.
Yep. And so he lives in Chicago. He's on his own there. And then we've got two boys here, and 17 and 14. So it's been interesting with everything that's going on with COVID, right? And homeschooling. And Steve? Isaiah is our 17-year-old, and Xavier is our 14-year-old. And it's been challenging for sure for them, and they're missing their friends and cooped up in the house, and it's just been a a very challenging period of time all across the board for sure. But at the same token, it's nice to be able to see the kids as much as we've been able to see them. We've definitely been doing more things and certainly enjoying more time together. But like anything else, it can be a little challenging when everyone's cooped up under one roof, and it's just such a scary time for them, and of course for us as well. But it's it's an interesting period of time. I think we're all going to look back on and really see how so many of us who were just in that kind of that hustle mode and kind of in that go mode have really stepped back to reassess what's most important, how they want to live and how they want to operate, how they want to work their businesses. And I don't want to say that we've gone from go to stop, but I think that we've certainly at least begun to take inventory on what's most important and what we want our lives and businesses to look like.
Yeah, I think we all, our eyes are wide open to just how important life and staying here is. I always say I don't remember fighting to stay alive so hard before, because it is a fight, so that's for sure. You mentioned your wife and the funeral home and stuff. So let me see, I think you've been married, has been close to 30 years or not?
Yeah, since 1997.
Wow. That's amazing. So, and she's in business. You're in business. What's your wife's name?
Yeah, Lena, Lena.
Yeah. So what would you say is the key to having a successful marriage when you got two business people, strong-minded, the type of people? What makes it work?
Yeah, it's interesting, right? And it's not going to be a one size fits all, that's for sure. I think for us, it really just boils down to number one, we still make each other laugh to this day. I mean, we're both we both love silly things and just keep each other entertained. Like my wife says, I think we're kind of each other's clown, so to speak. And it's good because you have to laugh, you have to have fun, for sure. I also think that for us, it's a lot of mutual respect.
That's a big one right there. Respect, yes.
It is, in terms of I can't imagine doing what she does for a living. She can't imagine doing what I do for a living, and yet we both really appreciate what the other does and how we do it, and also just in terms of the respect insofar as allowing that other person to be who they are. And that's hard to do. I mean, in many relationships, you just want to shape the person into who you want them to be, because for whatever reason, you're not comfortable with who you are. And the things that you're battling with are rearing their ugly heads in the ways that you're trying to move your significant other into whatever that picture of them is that you believe you want them to be. Right. So I think just having that mutual respect of saying we're not the same person. We look at things differently, and we look at life through our own eyes and through our own perspectives based on the data that we've each individually received over the years. And it doesn't make me right and doesn't make her wrong, and vice versa. And that's really hard, I think, for a lot of couples to do, is to allow their significant other to have that different viewpoint and come from a different perspective, and still respect them for what they believe to be true, even if you don't. And that's a challenge. And then, I think the third piece of it is that we both have expertise in certain areas that we can teach to the other. From the standpoint of she teaches me stuff every day, and I'm a willing student, and vice versa. And so just being in that relationship of having your significant other be able to teach you and help you grow, and being willing to allow them to teach you and help you to grow, is certainly one of the keys to longevity. And the reality is, there's a lot of folks out there who just don't look at their relationship in terms of um, the best way to put it is in terms of the amount of control that they're trying to exercise over their spouse, and the freedoms that they allow their spouse to have. And we actually, my wife and I, just ran this exercise a couple of weeks ago.
Mm-hmm.
And I asked her, on a scale of 1 to 10, how much freedom do you feel like I give you to do what you want to do and be who you want to be, and so on and so forth. And my answer to that same question was, I would say about a 7.5, something like that. And she actually answered it the exact same way. And I think that's really important. Is, you don't want to give your spouse, you don't want to be a 10 for them, because then they feel like you don't care and you're just letting them run wild and do whatever they want to do and you've got no interest, right? Mm-hmm. But you still want to have enough input and say in terms of what they do and how they do it and so on, because what they do potentially impacts the relationship and it affects the family, right? So I think that's an interesting way to look at the dynamic of a relationship as well, right? Which is, where are you on that scale of 1 to 10, and insofar as freedoms and control, so to speak, and match yourself up against them to see what that shakes out to be.
Yeah. In the short time we have left, I'd love to touch on and get some of your insight to share with the readers and listeners as far as what worked for you in podcasting. I mean, you had Reinvention Radio, or had it. That's the one you sold, right?
No, we sold Beyond 8 Figures. I still have Reinvention Radio. Yeah.
Okay. And so what I would like for you to do is kind of share some of your success tips and strategies and formulas for success for other podcasters. And then, what made you decide to sell Beyond the 8 Figures? And if someone else is thinking about selling their show, what are the key components to making that happen?
Yeah. So I will simply say this, which is, the quote unquote success that we've had in podcasting is probably a very different metric than what a lot of other people might use. Okay. I mean, would I have liked to have hundreds of millions of downloads on the show and our shows and so on? Sure. Right. Who wouldn't? You put something out, you want as many people to hear it as possible and so on. Who wouldn't? However, we never got to those sort of numbers, but we realized quite quickly that it didn't matter. For us, having the shows simply gave us a vehicle with which to connect with people that I wanted to connect with. Mm-hmm. It gave us a vehicle with which to have the credibility and authority to be able to teach others about the medium of podcasting. And we used it largely as a lead generation mechanism with which to attract ideal prospects to our products, programs, and services, right? So for us, that was one of the key differentiators. Is we really understood that we weren't going at this in terms of, we have to build a top 10 show. Okay. We just wanted to build a show that was entertaining enough and provided enough value for people who were listening to be able to say, yeah, this is a show I want to continue to listen to. But more importantly, I want to connect with Steve and his team to be able to help me do something similar in terms of leveraging the power of new media, as we put it, right? So just having that clear understanding of what the win is for you is super important, right? And whatever that is, it's going to be different for every person, right? Period, end story. And so just having that clarity is super important. And then to that end, insofar as selling Beyond 8 Figures, we originally started Beyond 8 Figures because our goal for that show was for me to build my Rolodex. We wanted to build my Rolodex because at the time I was thinking about launching a real estate endeavor that was going to be capital intensive. And I needed people who either could stroke a check to support that initiative or could introduce me to other people who could. So that was the original thinking. Was I'm going to sit down with people who have either exited for more than 8 figures or currently run businesses that gross more than 8 figures annually, and really get to the bottom of how they do what they do and why they do it and so on and so forth, in the hopes of helping our audience to be able to do the same. And once that idea kind of went by the wayside in terms of, I'm not going to be doing this real estate endeavor anymore because we're so focused on Podcast Magazine and the related initiatives.
Mm-hmm.
Then it became really clear that the show didn't serve us in that manner any longer. And went out to my list and said, hey, here's an opportunity, right, for someone to take over this show. And we ended up finding a buyer and negotiated terms that will end up being really good for us, that are really good for us. As a matter of fact, part of the terms there included cryptocurrency. And so the value of crypto since we inked that deal, and now it's almost doubled in value, right? And it'll keep going up as far as everyone that I talk to is concerned. So we'll see what happens on that front. But yeah, you just have to really think about, are you building something to sell? Or are you building something that you want to keep and run and eventually just dissolve if you lose the fire for it? But yeah, you got to know when to fold them. You got to know when to move on to something else. You got to know when you get burnt out on it, for sure. I mean, I haven't recorded a new episode of Reinvention Radio for a few months now. Just kind of lost the drive, but it'll come back.
It'll come back. Yeah. So for other people thinking, okay, I've had my show for a long time. I've kind of lost interest. Do you suggest for them to consider selling their show, or I don't know?
I think it's an option.
Their show?
Yeah. I mean, look, there are a lot of options, and that is certainly one of them. And one of the things that we're actually doing is developing a podcast valuation tool so that you can simply plug in some numbers and you can get a sense of what the value is of cool. that show. And then behind that, we're going to actually launch a marketplace that'll give people the opportunity to buy and sell shows, because I do believe that these are assets. Anytime you have
so far ahead, I just can't believe it. I'm just sitting over here amazed. I mean, you say one thing after another. I'm like, his mind never stops. Does your mind never stop?
No, my mind needs to stop. Although, I will say that it's a blessing and it's a curse, right? Yeah. Because most people give up on something long before it hits critical mass, and they get tired of it, especially when you have a mind like I do. You just kind of think like, okay, what else can we do? What's better? What's, continually improving upon what you've already created, as opposed to just simply digging in and making that one thing as good as you can possibly make it. So the beautiful thing about what we've got going on now is that everything that we are creating, that we have, revolves around the conversation of podcasting.
Yes.
And so at least we're very specific around that. And eventually some of these pieces may be able to spin off and become standalone and so on. But for right now, we're putting them all under a larger umbrella that we're calling Ear Control. And so Ear Control is our umbrella, our parent company, so to speak, of which there are 4 distinct pillars. We have our media pillar, which includes Podcast Magazine, right? And so you got the digital and the print edition, you have the web traffic, you got the email subscriber list and social following, et cetera. The second pillar is our own network of shows. So we launched our first Podcast Magazine network show, which is the Hot 50 Countdown. Again, the Casey Kasem style show that counts down the top 50 shows that are found in our Hot 50 chart every month. Casey Kasem style, American Top 40, et cetera. And we'll be adding more shows to that particular network. So it's a second pillar. The third pillar is our live event pillar. So Pod Expo and our virtual events. So all of our live events and virtual events will fall under that pillar. And then our fourth pillar is technology. And we're in the process of developing an app to help with discovery. And then, as I said, the podcast valuation tool and the podcast marketplace, that'll all fall under that particular pillar. And all of it feeds one another. The magazine feeds the show feeds the technology feeds the live event, and it all becomes very circular and complementary. So as soon as it stops being complementary, that's where we'll say, okay, we're probably off course and we need to get back to center.
Boy, you set this up beautifully. Final question. What's a two-parter? What's the biggest challenge you ever faced? And just share the one-liner, two-liners on how you got past it. And then what's the one thing that you credit that set you up in the direction you want to go in your life? I know beyond your beautiful mom and your dad, what's that one thing?
Yeah, well, I may circle back and ask you about that second piece again, but let me answer
Okay.
the first piece in terms of the
Okay.
biggest challenge.
Mm.
And I do think the biggest challenge that I've faced is really bottoming out in November of 2013, and really just feeling like I had nothing left to give
Mhm.
to this world.
Mhm.
Just I just couldn't bring myself out of a dark hole that I had worked my way into. You know, just talked myself into that's where I needed to be in that very dark place.
Mm.
And fortunately, through the love of my wife and through the love of my family, and ultimately one of the bigger things that we ended up doing was moving from Chicago to San Diego,
Okay.
which I needed to do from the standpoint of I am. It turns out I have really low neurotransmitter levels naturally, and then being in the gray and the cold and so on of the Midwest was just really making that a lot worse for me.
Oh,
And
okay.
so moving to San Diego helped quite a bit in terms of being in the sunshine and the warmer weather. And I'm just that's just how I'm naturally wired. I'm just naturally wired for warmer weather and the sun. And
Mm.
so that was a necessary change, and it was really hard, right? I mean, my wife had to leave and my boys had to leave all their family behind, and it was just it's still difficult, 6 years later to this day. I mean, we can't even go home now because of what's going on with the coronavirus. None of us have been home for a year, right? So
Yeah.
just so hard not to be able to be with those you love. But fortunately, through again their help and some fancy little white pills and so on, I was able to move beyond that and realize that I've still got a lot more to give to this world. And I've got a lot more work to do. And I just need to take it day by day and do whatever I can do to maximize the time that I've been given here, because life is fleeting and
Never
time is
know.
fleeting. We just never know what tomorrow is going to bring. And to be in that pity party of where I wasn't serving me well. It wasn't serving my family well. And frankly, it was just selfish. And I think that the shift, and this goes back to the nature of a strong relationship as well, in terms of one of the key characteristics of what makes for a strong relationship, is you just have to be much more selfless. And I think
Mm.
up until that
Like that.
point, and it was
Mhm.
very selfish. And so being more selfless has really helped me to evolve as a man, as a father, as a husband, as a business person. And we'll see where things take us. So
And as a fabulous mentor, I'm
yes.
just saying, what's the one thing do you give credit to for where you are now? Like for me, as a kid, I felt like Casper, and that was such a terrible feeling that I think the reason I want to help people come out of the shadows into the spotlight is because I know that bad feeling. And so
Mm.
whenever I think about that feeling, it wants me to help that underdog and bring them up. So what do you think the one thing is for you?
Yeah, it's interesting. In author land, they say you write the book that you most need. And
Yeah.
so for me, writing What Is Your What, Discover the One Amazing Thing You Were Born to Do, was really based on my own need
Mm-hmm.
for trying to figure out how I'm naturally wired to excel, and what are the differences that I'm here to make, and so on. And I do think that being able to create that framework of having clarity around my core gift and the primary vehicle I use to share that gift, and then the people that I'm most compelled to serve, and then putting that into action and teaching others how to do the same thing and empowering them to discover their what, and then be able to share and monetize that, and using their natural gifts and talents in a positive way that allows them to create the life that they deserve and they desire. I think that's really been an integral part of this process here, is recognizing that if I can help others discover their what, and they go out and they make this world a better place as a result, ultimately this makes my world a better place, and makes it a better place for my wife and kids and our family and so on. And so really just embracing the notion that you are the solution to someone else's problem, and
Mm.
that everyone has the ability to teach, and everyone has the ability to really help and serve in their own singular, unique, powerful way, and giving them the tools to do that has really been just a very powerful shift for me in recognizing that there's just so much more to the world than what's going on between these 2 ears.
Yeah. Well, this has been a pleasure. Thank you. I feel so honored to have done this interview for your 1 year anniversary. Yay! Uh-oh, I got a real clapper. Yay! Magazine, and to your amazing team. You do have an amazing team. Thank you for letting me be one of the contributors. Is there anything that I didn't ask that you would like to close this off and share with your readers? And as hard as it is for talk show hosts to do it, I'm going to zip it and let you go ahead and share your final thought to your readers.
Yeah, I would just simply say that we couldn't do this without you, and really appreciate the fact that you're you've come along for the ride, and you're a part of this journey. And ultimately, our goal is to serve you at the highest level possible, to help you really connect on a much deeper level with the medium that we know you also love. And so it's an honor and a privilege to be able to have you here as part of our journey. And just a big thank you for that. I just appreciate everyone who subscribes, and those who will subscribe, and just appreciate all the people who are going behind the microphone to share their brilliance on a daily, weekly, hourly, whatever it might be basis. And we just look forward to continuing to support those who have the audacity to create, and of course support those who want to be a part of this discussion in terms of just going deeper with the podcasters you love, and really beyond the microphone of what you see there on the surface, and being a part of our journey. So just thank you for that.
Well, everyone, that is a wrap. My name is Blair Glover. I am the music contributor here. If you guys want to be featured in, be sure to let me know if you've got a music podcast. And this man here, he is none other than the founder and editor-in-chief of Podcast Magazine, Steve Olsher. We've gone behind the microphone, behind the mask. You have seen the man, and you see how authentic he is, and how he wants to continue delivering this magazine for the fans of podcasters. I know that's you. So be sure to pick up your subscription and share it with a friend. That's all, y'all. Bye.